spinal nerves, while we have 33 vertebrae. So now let's see why it happens. So there are 8 cervical nerves, 12 thoracic nerves, 5 lumbar nerves, 5 sacral nerves, and 1 coccygeal nerve. So we have 31 pair of spinal nerves, while we have only 33. We have 33 vertebra. We have 7 cervical vertebra, 12 thoracic vertebra, 5 lumbar vertebra, 5 sacral vertebra, which are fused to form 1, but they are counted as 5 because 5 sacral nerves emerge, and there are 4 coccygeal vertebrae. As a result, what do we have? There are total, if we count them, they will be 33 vertebrae, but 31 spinal nerves. There are 2 enlargements in the spinal cord, an upper enlargement which is called the cervical enlargement, and a lower enlargement at the lumbar part of the spinal cord which is called the lumbosacral enlargement. So we will be seeing all these. So let's see. So the upper part, so this is what I told you, the spinal nerves, they are cervical 8, thoracic 12, lumbar 5, sacral 5, and coccygeal 1. And there are 2 swellings, which are the cervical swelling at the cervical part, C5, 6, 7, 8, T1, which forms the brachial plexus, and the lumbosacral swelling, which gives rise to nerves, which are giving rise to the lower limb. So that is the reason why the swellings are present, because they give rise to the brachial plexus and the lumbar plexus. Now, if you look very carefully, you will see that the nerves which are emerging from the spinal cord, they are initially horizontal. And as you go down, if you look, I'm just showing this cursor, they are going, because they'll be going one above the other, and gradually you'll find that they are getting more and more as the spinal cord is present in the vertebral column, the nerves will start getting oblique. So we will see why it happens. Now look at this. This is a person. The vertebral column is being shown out here, and it has been exposed from the posterior side, that's from the spine, to show you the spinal cord and the nerve roots. If you look at here, the spinal cord terminates in an adult at the lower border of first lumbar vertebrae. Everybody should remember this. Where does the spinal cord terminate? So the spinal cord begins at the lower border of the medulla oblongata as it comes out from the foramen magnum. So the C cervical segment of the spinal cord will start at the upper part of C1, and it will terminate at the lower border of L1 in an adult. This is the adult spinal cord. Now, if we look at the spinal cord in a child, as the child is growing, in a small child, that is in an infancy in utero, the spinal cord is present throughout the vertebral column. Now look at this first picture where my cursor is going. You'll see that it is going out throughout the spinal cord is present with the vertebrae. This has been dissected out to show you that the spinal cord is emerging throughout. And what happens? As growth takes place, the vertebral bodies, they grow in a much faster rate in comparison to the spinal cord. That means the vertebrae are growing faster in relation to the spinal cord. As a result, what happens? The spinal cord goes up to L1 in an adult, while the spinal nerves are still emerging. So, but when the baby is born, the relative growth of the vertebral bodies are not as much as it is in an adult. So in a child, the spinal cord finishes or it extends up to third lumbar vertebrae. While in infancy, in utero, the spinal cord is present through and through. This is this picture out here on the left is actually showing you the sacral nerves. The sacral nerves, after the fused sacrum has been removed, to show you how the sacral nerves emerge from the sacrum. Now we go on to the coverings of the spinal cord. Now look at this picture, this elongated structure that you see. So the spinal cord is an elongated structure, a cylindrical elongated structure lying in the vertebral canal. It has two swellings, one above and one below, one in the cervical part and one in the lumbar part. The lower end of the spinal cord forms a conical structure which is called the conus medullaris. This is called the conus medullaris. Now let's come on to the next picture out here. This is the spinal cord in brown. Now if we see the coverings of the spinal cord, this green structure that you see is the outer covering of the spinal cord, which is the dura mater. The dura mater is the first covering, which has a meningeal layer. There is no endosteal layer here. So we have a true epidural space in which lie the basivertebral venous plexuses. Right? So we have the dura mater, which is a thick membrane covering the spinal cord. The second light blue structure that we see out here is the arachnoid process. You can see that the dura mater, the arachnoid matter, they are following the nerves which are emerging, but immediately where the nerves emerge, you have all done thorax, so you have read about the spinal nerve emerging from the intervertebral foramen. So at the intervertebral foramen, they fuse with the periosteum. So they do not continue more. And the third pink layer that you see out here, that is the pia mater. That is the pia mater in which the blood vessels will be going. It is intimately adhered to the spinal cord, and these three coverings are also present in the brain. So what is the lower limit of the dura mater? The dura mater finishes off at second sacrum level. Second sacral vertebra, S2, is its lower extent. Arachnoid also finishes at S2, while the pia mater emerges down as a thin thread-like structure which is called the filum terminale, and that gets attached to the tip of the coccyx. So if we ask you what are the coverings of the dura mater and just tell us the extent of these, you should be able to tell me that the pia mater continues as the filum terminale. So if we say this part is the conus medullaris, the nerves would be coming as a bunch. We have more pictures later on to show you, and in that if we see that one white colored thread would be there among the nerve roots, which we can identify as the filum terminale. Right? So I continue with this. So this is the lower end of the spinal cord. This one, if we count this, this is the 12th thoracic. So this is the first lumbar. This is the first lumbar, and we have the spinal cord ending here, the conus medullaris. So this is the conus medullaris. This picture shows it with the coverings of the meninges, and this picture the meninges have been stripped off. So you see, now what do you see? You see the nerve bunches coming down. You see the nerve rootlets coming down because the spinal cord has finished at L1, but the spinal nerves are emerging. That means the thoracic segments and the spinal segments do not correspond with each other. So they are hanging from the side of the spinal cord from the conus medullaris, and this structure out here is called cauda equina because it looks like the tail of a horse. So it's called cauda equina. And the square box that has been shown out here, this is the part of the sacrum, which is showing you the sacral plexuses. So we have this part of the spinal cord. Since it looks like a square horse's tail, is called cauda equina, and I have some real photographs of our spinal cords which you will be seeing subsequently. So you understand now what is the term conus medullaris? The conical lower limit of the spinal cord is called conus medullaris. Now the dura is present here. It finishes off at S2, the dura and the arachnoid. You can see here very clearly, I told you. That means this much portion of the spinal cord has only spinal nerves, but it has no spinal cord. That means in the subarachnoid space, what would one have? There'll be CSF. So if we can put in a needle out here for a lumbar puncture, one would be able to tap CSF, cerebrospinal fluid, to see if there is any problem with the patient who has come with symptoms of meningitis or tuberculosis or any other picture. Now this picture gives you an idea about the dermatomal distribution. You have already done this in different parts. As you have finished, you have done head and neck, you have done lower limb, upper limb, you have done the thorax, and you have understood what dermatomes mean. That when the spinal nerve emerges, it supplies a strip of skin which carries the nerve supply of that root. So if we say this is T1 on the medial side of the hand, and this is T2 near this part, and the brachial plexus C5, 6, 7 coming to this part, C8 on the lateral side, the ulnar nerve C8 and T1. You can actually find out which part of the nerve is affected. Now you can see in the nipple area is around T5. We come to the umbilical region, it's about T10. So it's all horizontal strips in the body, in the thorax and abdomen. Genital area is L1, and the legs also, if we see the lower limb, also they have dermatomal distribution. So what does it mean? It means that the particular segment, so if there is a compression at T5, if there is a compression of the thoracic vertebra at T5, they will be, and the compression is such that it's not midline, it's on the right side. That means the right sensory nerves would get affected, and the patient is going to get pain, real pain on the left side in the T5 segment that is supplied by T5 spinal nerves, the sensory nerves. So, and the disease which is usually affected, the sensory nerves get affected, is herpes, a very painful condition because it affects the dorsal root ganglia, and the pain goes on in the strips of the dermatome. In neurology, it's very important to know dermatomes. From that, actually, one can make out which is the segment which has got affected, because you might be having pain in your hand or in a forearm, but the problem is actually lying at the cervical vertebrae. So it's very important to understand the dermatomes of the body. That is the reason why we insist that you should learn the dermatomes, because those are very important for clinical practice when you see a patient. Now these are showing you the dorsal rami, the spinal nerves, the roots which come to the dorsal side are the dorsal rami, and you can see how they're coming out from the intervertebral foramen and running across. So the posterior roots coming and supplying the back area. So now there is one important part which we have to understand, that there are 8 cervical nerves, but there are 7 cervical vertebrae. That means what happens? The first cervical nerve emerges from the upper border of C1. The seventh nerve will come out from the upper border of C7, while the C8 will come out from lower border of C7, or we say upper border of T1. So as a result, what happens when T1 nerve comes, it will be coming down from the lower border. Are you understanding? Because the vertebral column is also has curvatures, as you have done, cervical curvature, it has a thoracic curvature, it has a lumbar curvature, and the spinal cords, as they are coming out, they are giving the nerve rootlets from the particular segment. But as we go down, when I was telling you about this, initially they are all horizontal, but gradually as you go down, you can see the obliquity of these nerves as they are coming down. So there is a formula to remember that which nerve is coming down. So, so sensation of C7 is for the middle finger. Yes, we know that, which is coming from C7 would be coming up from the upper border of C7, while T1 will be coming down from the lower border of first thoracic nerve. C8 and lower spinal roots leave below the corresponding vertebral segments. So if we say T1, T2 and T3, they will be coming one segment below, and as we go down, they will be adding on segments. So I'll be telling you how to go about it. T10 sensation, this is also very important. Spinal nerve is approximately level with the abdomen. It's at the umbilical region. And T12 sensation is approximately level with the pubic bone. And the lumbar nerve sensations are at the legs. So these are very important. And the spinal cord ends at the lower border of L1. Now let's see this part. This is lower border of L1, and this is where it terminates. So between this, so sacral cord segments are, so these are all, this group of nerves would be the cauda equina. Now let's look at this. So if you see this, this is the vertebral body. These are the intervertebral foramens from which they are coming out. This is the cervical segment. This is the cervical segment. The lower part is the lumbar segment. Because I'm just showing these two because this gives rise to the brachial plexus. This gives rise to the lumbar plexus. If there is a compression of the intervertebral discs are made up of two components. The inner component is called nucleus pulposus. It's almost a semi-solid structure, while the outer fibers are the annulus fibrosus. And when they are protruding anteriorly, they're compressing the nerves at their exit point. And this nerve out here is L5. We say L5. And if this nerve gets compressed, and below that would be the S1, it might affect one or two discs, because it's between L5 and S1. So these nerves would get affected and they would be pain along the supply of L5 and X1, as you can see here. So L5 is causing difficulty in dorsiflexion, S1 is causing difficulty in plantar flexion. This gives you an exact, almost an answer to the problem that I had stated before. So relationship of spinal nerves to vertebral levels, cervical add 1. So if it is C1, it's upper border. Upper thoracic T1 to T5, that means it goes on to the upper border of the nerve till T4, till the vertebra. The lower thoracic from T6 to T9, we have to add 3 vertebrae. So if it is the T9 spinal cord, it will be almost coming at the level of, emerging at the level of T12. At T10 will come at L1 and L2. T11 will be near the L3 and L4. T12 will be at L5 and L1 will be at the sacrococcygeal nerves will be coming, will be at the level of L1. So this is a formula which you have to understand, and initially probably you have to mug it up because it's not going to be very easy to remember it that way, to remember how they are coming out. So it's only that we understand that the vertebrae are continuing down till here, 33 vertebrae, while the spinal cord is finishing here at L1. But the segments are all there. For all the vertebra, we have segments. So we have to understand that which segment corresponds to which. So L1, when we talk about L1, the sacrococcygeal part, it is actually coming out from this level. So these we will be doing with you with number of exercises to get you understand this in a better way. Now look at this. This is a spinal cord with its blood vessels, the arachnoid and the dura mater. And now let's talk about the spinal nerves which are emerging. The spinal cord, as we see here, the anterior part, the one which is facing us is the anterior part, and there's a fissure in the center which is called the anterior median fissure, and lies here the anterior spinal artery with their corresponding veins. And look at this. This is the anterior root. This is the posterior root. The posterior roots have these swellings which are called the posterior root ganglion or the dorsal ganglion. So the posterior root is completely sensory. The anterior root is motor. So when we say anterior root means it's just a motor component. When we say posterior root means it's just a sensory component. They fuse at the intervertebral foramen and they emerge as a spinal nerve. As they emerge as a spinal nerve, it's a spinal nerve which has both the motor and the sensory components. They have both the motor and the sensory components, and they would divide into ventral and dorsal rami. Ventral rami coming to the front and dorsal rami going behind, and they would be having both sensory and motor components. So this is what I'm showing you. So this is the anterior median fissure. Now look at the cross section of the spinal cord. Look at this picture. This is a black and white picture showing it very clearly. We have the spinal cord section. Now what you see? You see a lighter area and a darker area. The lighter area is called the white matter. The darker area is called the gray matter. In the gray matter, you can see a small black dot, which is actually not a dot, it's a hole, which is called the central canal through which CSF passes. The posterior rootlets, you can see the posterior root ganglia. These are the anterior rootlets. So this part that you see out here, this is the anterior median fissure. And posteriorly, you have a sulcus, which is called the posterior median sulcus. So the spinal cord is divided into two parts, an anterior median fissure and a posterior median sulcus. The gray matter, which is present in the center, it's in the shape of an H, having two horns on the anterior side, which are the motor components called the ventral horns or the anterior horns, and two thin horns on the posterior side, which are the dorsal horns or the posterior horns. And you can see that the posterior horns are coming to the edge of the spinal cord, while these are larger, bigger, they do not reach the edge of the spinal cord. Is it clear? They do not reach the edge. So the transverse section, so you see the dorsal root ganglion on the posterior side, the edge-shaped gray matter, and in this you can see a small lateral horn out here. The posterior horn goes on to the edge of the spinal cord posteriorly. The anterior horn is not coming to the edge, it's only there in the anterior part, and on the lateral side, that is between first thoracic to second lumbar, we have a lateral horn which is present for the sympathetic. For S2, S3, S5, 4 and L1, L2, these are the parts of the spinal cord where we have these horns. Otherwise, they're only anterior horn and a posterior horn. The lateral horn is for the sympathetic autonomic nervous system. Now, the part of the white matter which is on the anterior side is called the anterior funiculus. The part of the spinal cord between the posterior horns is called the posterior funiculus. So between the ventral horns is anterior funiculus, and between posterior and anterior this side is called the lateral funiculus. So the white matter is divided into funiculus. Funiculus means they are white matter bundles, fibers which are present in it. The spinal cord, what is it? It's a conduit. It's a transmitter through which nerves are going up and down, and they are going up and down through the white matter. The gray matter has the cell bodies which are giving rise to these nerves, right? So now I come to something that I should have done it before, but anyway, doesn't matter. So the epidural space is the dura and the vertebral column. It's filled with actually vertebral periosteum, and it has a lot of vertebral venous plexus and the fat. Between the spinal cord and the lower arch of the dura, I had shown you there is a space which I had shown you before, that is called the lumbar cistern, because I told you there is CSF in it, and this is a site for anesthesia because the nerve roots are emerging through these epidural spaces also. So as they are emerging, if you give an anesthetic, local anesthetic here, these nerves which are carrying the sensory fibers from the local area which we want to anesthetize, especially at the lumbar cistern, what happens? The nerves do not have the pain sensation, and this is used for normal labor nowadays. Epidural anesthesia is given for labor for painless delivery. Now we have in the subarachnoid space there is CSF, so one has to make the patient lie in the left lateral position, and the ideal site is between L3 and L4 in an adult, because one knows the spinal cord finishes off at L1. So between L3 and L4 in a right lateral position, one sees, palpates the iliac crest, the highest point of the iliac crest. That transtubercular pain is at the L3 level. So just at that level is where one inserts the needle in the back, where one punctures the skin, the subcutaneous tissue out here, the superficial fascia with the fat and connective tissue out here, the ligaments which are present connecting the upper parts of the spine, which are called the supraspinous ligament, and between the spines are the interspinous ligament. So the first ligament which will be pierced will be the supraspinous, infraspinous, and between the laminae would be the ligamentum flava. As you pierce this, there'll be a resistance, the dura goes, and then the arachnoid, and immediately once the resistance has been, you have overcome the resistance, you reach the subarachnoid space where CSF would come out. So you see that the CSF would be coming out from this side of the needle as drops. If it comes out too slow, then there's some problem. If it comes out too fast, that means there is a raised CSF, raised intracranial pressure. One should not do a lumbar puncture in these kind of conditions. If it is blood filled, that means either you have punctured a vein here, but if it's a small puncture of the vein, when you do a second tap, there'll be no blood. But if it is blood from the CSF because of a venous or an intracranial injury to a vessel, then it is dangerous. One should stop it. So these are the applied aspect of the spinal cord. And now look at this picture. These are the dissected spinal cords that we show you in the dissection hall. So it doesn't look so colorful as you saw in those pictures that I showed you. You can see out here the spinal cord is lying in this dura, and we have certain pictures, certain parts out here. This is the L1. So we have the conus medullaris here. And with the conus medullaris, these nerve bundles that you see are the cauda equina. You have the lumbosacral enlargement out here. Now there is a ligament which has been shown out here as denticulate ligament. What is denticulate ligament? It is a ligament which is formed by the modification of pia mater. So between the ventral and the dorsal root, they anchor it to the outer coverings to say strengthen the spinal cord. So it is some kind of an anchor which teeth-like processes lying between the ventral and the dorsal root of the spinal nerves, and they are thin thread-like structures. And down here in this also there will be a thread-like structure which is called the filum terminale. And this ligamentum denticulata is a modification of pia mater, and there are only 21 pairs of ligamentum denticulata. Though we have 31 pair of spinal nerves, the denticulata ligament are 21. So this is the same. You can see the dorsal root ganglion. So when you get a spinal cord like this, so first of all, we have to identify, how do we identify which is the anterior surface and which is the posterior surface? You can't make out actually very clearly about the anterior median fissure and the posterior median sulcus unless you make a transverse cut. So that also can be done. If you see the cuttage of the spinal cord, then you can make out the gray matter, and from that you can see. But if you cannot see the cuttage of the spinal cord, then you look for the dorsal root ganglion, which will be on the posterior side. So you feed them as bulges on the posterior side, immediately know that this is the posterior root, and you can say which is the posterior and which is the anterior part. The cauda equina always is going to be on the inferior side. So from that you can actually hold it in anatomical position and describe the structures clearly to the examiners, and it's for your own understanding. So here, just look at this. These are the teeth-like processes. Can you see these thin structures? They look like polythene actually. This is the ligamentum denticulata, and also in the anterior median fissure, there is a modification of the pia mater, which is called the ligamentum splendens. That is also, so the pia mater has 3 modifications, and this you see, this is the anterior spinal artery in the anterior median fissure. This we've already done. So modifications of pia are ligamentum denticulata, which are 21 paired, ligamentum splendens, and filum terminale. Right? I hope you're understanding all this. Now let's look at the gray matter. Now let's look at the gray matter. See the gray matter at different parts of the spinal cord. When we go from the cervical part, the gray matter is much more because of the brachial plexus. This is C5, but upper cervical will have less gray matter. Look at the structure. It's oval. The thoracic is heart-shaped, and the gray matter is less, but you can see a lateral horn here. The lumbar, again, it is more because of the lumbar plexus, the lumbosacral, and the coccygeal. Of course, it's a very thin, small bone, so we can say that it is occupying almost the part of the coccyx, because this is actually more prominent in lower animals. In human beings, we have 4 coccygeal vertebrae which fuse to form a single bone, which is called the tip coccyx, and this is the tailbone. Actually, it's a very small and short bone, but it does give rise to a coccygeal nerve. This is the anterior median sulcus, and this is the posterior median fissure. Now these are, again, as we go in a longitudinal direction, these are all stained. I've already done that in a better picture there. And this is the formation of the spinal nerves, which I've already discussed, showing you the peripheral nerves. And as the peripheral nerve comes out, it will be dividing into a ventral and a dorsal rami. So till here they are only motor or only sensory, right? Now we look at the tracts of the white matter. This is very important. This is very important, and each student has to draw this on their own, because these are the tracts. We have ascending tracts and descending tracts. Tracts which are ascending from the spinal cord and going to the brain. Which are going to the brain, they are the ascending tracts. So the tracts on this side of on the left side of this picture are ascending tracts, going from the spinal cord and finally going to the sensory cortex in the cerebral cortex. And the descending tracts coming from the cerebral cortex and coming onto the spinal cord, which is called the descending tracts. Now the descending tracts, first of all, I'll give you one example, that these are the motor parts of the nervous system. The part which is coming from the spinal cord to the from the cerebral cortex to the spinal cord is called the upper motor neuron. And the part which is coming from the spinal cord to the peripheral nerves, as we did the peripheral nerves going to the limbs and the body, are called lower motor neurons. So if there is a paralysis between the brain, that's the cerebrum, to the spinal cord, it will be called as an upper motor neuron paralysis. And if it is a lesion from the lower motor neuron to the periphery, it is called a lower motor. It's very essential to understand that. And this is the way the fibers are arranged. This part is the posterior funiculus. Here we have two columns of sensory fibers called the fasciculus gracilis medially and the fasciculus cuneatus laterally. Right? And this is where the posterior horn comes up to. On the lateral funiculus, we have two tracts. One on the side, we have the posterior spinocerebellar tracts and anterior spinocerebellar tracts. The posterior anterior cerebellar tracts, spinocerebellar tracts, are carrying our sensation of position and equilibrium, posture to the cerebellum. Cerebellum is the organ which actually interprets all this and helps in our balancing and equilibrium of the body. As we go on, we'll be describing all this. The posterior column sensations are sensations which are carrying sensations of proprioception, vibration, touch, and pressure. We have receptors which are interoreceptors and exteroreceptors. So they would be carrying fibers from the interoreceptors, our joint sensations, our vibration sensations, our position sensations. All that is carried by these two tracts, which are called the fasciculus gracilis from the lower part of the body and fasciculus cuneatus from the upper part of the body. Now there are two tracts out here. One is called the spinothalamic tracts, anterior spinothalamic and lateral spinothalamic. Lateral spinothalamic is for pain and temperature, and anterior is for touch. So these are the, and spino-olivary, which will be from the spinal cord going to the olivary nucleus. Spino-olivary, we have spinotectal, which are going to the tectum is the folliculi. Gradually we'll do, but now let's concentrate on only these four tracts: the spinocerebellar, posterior anterior, the spinothalamic, lateral and anterior, and the posterior column tracts. And here in the anterior tract, this side the display is only of the motor fibers which are coming from above. These are called the descending tracts. The lateral corticospinal and the anterior corticospinal tracts. These are the pyramidal tracts, and the rest of the tracts are all extrapyramidal tracts. The rubrospinal coming from the red nucleus, the olivospinal coming from the olivary nucleus, the vestibulospinal coming from the vestibular nucleus, the tectospinal coming from the tectum, So we will be doing these with you. So just now, it might be quite a bit understanding all this, but we will be doing all this gradually with every demonstration. Also, we'll be doing tracks with you so that you remember them. And this is a diagram which is asked in the exam. We ask you anytime or to draw this diagram, you should be able to draw. And this is the central canal. The same showing you, and this shows you the topography actually. So this is the sacral segment, the lumbar segment, how they are coming. Actually, next week, Dr. Babita would be taking this classes on tracks, and she will be telling you about these organization of the tracks, which are called the laminations. They are called the laminations, and each part of the body is represented in one part of the spinal cord, and it goes according to that track. It's not that the upper limb fibers would come to the medial side and then move to the lateral side. It's similarly like an electric circuit as we have in our house. If it's a light for one room, particularly wires would be coming on to that particular room. They don't go here and there. So this is what I told you, the pyramidal tracts, the lateral corticospinal and the anterior corticospinal, and the rest are called the extrapyramidal tracts, which are the rubrospinal, reticulospinal, olivospinal, and vestibulospinal. And these are the ascending tracts, ascending and descending tracts. And in this, so that's about the white matter. In the gray matter, you see that there are nuclear groups, because that's only for nuclear. And this shows you the tracts, how they're going up and down. Now we have to learn all these tracks, how they are going up and how they are going down, and what are the centers or what are the stations where they relay. Right? So I come on to this gray matter. This is the organization of the gray matter. You can see that they are color coded. I'll go on to the next picture. There have been two ways of describing the gray matters of the spinal cord. In one, there are gray matters which are in nuclear groups, and in another matter they are arranged in laminal pattern, which are called the rex lamina, and they are numbered as Roman numericals. So the dorsal horn has numericals from 1 to 6. The intermediate is lamina 7. Lamina 8 is on the ventral horn, lateral side. Lamina 9 on the ventral horn, medial side. And near the central canal is called the lamina 10. So this is called the rexed laminae. But and there are also another way of describing the gray matter is in nuclear group. So the nuclear group of the motor neurons are on the anterior horn, a medial group and a lateral group, and on the dorsal side. So these are all motor fibers, motor nuclei, and these are all sensory nuclei. The intermediate, lateral and medial are for the sympathetic. So there are substantia gelatinosa, nucleus proteosus, and dorsal nucleus of Clark. You have to do this diagram also, learn this diagram also. I'll come on to another picture where I will now classify them. They also need a meaning. So there's a medial group of nuclei, there is a lateral group of nuclei. The medial group has actually a ventromedial and a dorsal medial. That means there is a small nuclear group here. The ventral medial and the dorsal medial, they supply the back and the trunk. And in the neck area, cervical region, they'll be supplying the neck region. So they are the midline nuclei, as they are on the midline, while the lateral group of the nuclei, the ventrolateral and the dorsolateral, there is a lateral group of nuclei, the ventrolateral, the dorsolateral, another is called the retrodorsolateral. They are actually 3 dots, and they would be supplying the pectoral region for the upper limb, depending upon what it is, the arm, the forearm, and the retrodorsal will be going in for the hand. So on the margin, there is the marginal nucleus. Substantia gelatinosa will be carrying fibers from the dorsal root ganglion. That would be the first order. Then the second order would be at the substantia gelatinosa, carrying pain and temperature fibers. This is present throughout. Marginal nucleus is present throughout. Nucleus proprius is for the spinocerebellar tracts. It's present throughout the spinal cord. And dorsal nucleus of Clark is between C8 and L4. It's present only between C8 and L4. This is for proprioception. So you have to understand that. And as I told you, you can see the lamina and the nuclear group have been overlapped in this picture. That means one can also say the lamina with this. So if I say area 2 means it's the substantia gelatinosa. The nucleus proprius is here at area 4. Similarly, these 9 and 10 are the ventrolateral, and these are 9 and 8 out here, especially the 8, that is ventromedial group. And this is the extent. It's a picture from Gray's Anatomy. You can all take it and try to see what are the nucleus. Because if we see this, there's another group out here, the central group of nucleus, which is present only in the cervical region. It's for phrenic and accessory nerve. Spinal accessory between C1 and C5. And this actually I did yesterday, but we will be giving you problems on this about injuries. So if the epidural space is, there is an injury there, it's the middle meningeal vessels, the artery and the veins which will get affected. So they get ruptured. It's a blow on the lateral side of the head. So there'll be bleeding in the epidural space, and it can accumulate as a clot, and it has to be relieved. Subdural is usually tearing of the superior cerebellar veins as they enter the superior sagittal sinus, that is the meninges get torn. And in a subarachnoid, it's non-traumatic, usually a rupture of an aneurysm or so. These are the, so they can also be intracerebral. So we continue with the next class. You have the next class is on histology. And after that, you'll be having demonstrations. And in these demonstrations, all these would be taught to you. So anyone has any question or anything can any questions? Okay, so I hope it was you could see the slides clearly. So now I will stop the session, so we go for the next class, right?